Hey everyone, this is Cameron from Renegade Animation on renegadepopculture.com. If you like what we do, please give us a like, a follow, and a rating on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to us. We are everywhere. Or come support our newly launched Patreon. That way we can keep doing what we love, and that's talk about the New York Children's International Film Festival. And now, on with the show.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Renegade Animation on the Renegade Pop Culture Podcast Network. My name is Mike. I'll be your host this evening. Joining me, as always, is the animation guru himself, Cameron.
Howdy, howdy.
And as we said at top, we are talking about the 2023 New York Children's International Film Festival. And before we get into the films that we're going to be discussing, how would you describe this year's festival, or at least the films that we decided to cover?
Well, unfortunately, we were not able to cover two films, Suzume, the new, Makoto Shinkai film, and the new film by the Miss Hokusai director, Lonely Castle. But I thought the overall lineup was pretty good. We weren't going to talk about Goodbye Dong-Li since we already did that. But out of the four films that we'll be talking about, I watched five, but we'll talk about it at another time. I thought it was a pretty good lineup. I saw Little Nicholas and Tatina last year during Animation is Film. So seeing them again was a very nice treat, on top of seeing the new Ernest and Celestine sequel, since it's been like a literal decade since the original film came out. It was one of my favorite movies, but we'll get to that when we get to that.
Right. So the movies that we'll be talking about today are Dunia and the Princess of Aleppo, Little Nicholas, Tina, and of course, Ernest and Celestine, A Trip to Giberisha.
All right, so let's get started with the first film that we shall be talking about, a Syrian-Canadian collaboration with Dunia. Forced to leave Syria because of the war, Dunia and her grandparents go in search of a new safe haven as she traverses the world in search of asylum. Dunia draws strength from the wisdom of the ancient world brought to light by her grandmother's magic Nigella seeds. Apologies if that is not how it's pronounced. This is a film that's directed by Maria Zarif and Andre Kadi, and I think you asked me this recently, Mike. This might be the first animated film we talk about here from Syria.
Kind of crazy to think about, just because the Syrian film industry is not something that gets a whole lot of attention here in the States, but I'm glad I have at least one of them under my belt.
Most of the time we're either talking about Japanese films, Chinese films, and the rare occasional French film on top of all the US features and anime. We don't get to talk about other parts of the world. And that's a shame, but that's also a problem of access, because we have no idea or any legal way to obtain some of these movies to discuss right now. Some of these are getting picked up and distributed by companies here in the States, like Blue Thermal is getting released by the time this review comes out by 11 Arts. And of course, the Ernest and Celestine follow-up is being released by G Kids. So far, though, 3 of the 4 films we are talking about today have no real distribution in the States yet, which is a shame. I know Little Nicholas got picked up by a distributor, but so far, who knows when or if it will actually get a on-demand release at the very least. Now, for Dunia, this is probably the most child-friendly. I mean, they're all very child-friendly and family-friendly and approachable in that regards. I do think some people are going to dismiss it because of its visual style, but I do think Dunia's animation presentation is very good. I think it reminds me of a lot of children's books illustrations and stylized caricatures that you would see on like magazines and such.
I definitely see that sort of aesthetic applied to the art style here.
I mean, like, I think most people, when they want to see animation from overseas, they want to see like the frame by frame cell animation stuff that you would see from Song of the Sea or what have you. Here, it's definitely very, I think the right term is motion tween, where characters have very basic movements, but they do enough with the art style to make it appealing to look at. Most people are willing to accept an animated film's visuals if it looks appealing. Because sometimes it's like, okay, here's a CGI film and someone did not translate the concept art to CGI at all. It's that kind of thing. Here, though, it looks great, and it helps that there's a bit more lighting work, shading, different camera angles. It's a little more dynamic than its storybook presentation would give it, which usually, like, if you've seen films like Lamia's Poem and such, those look very for kids entertainment. Not like as a downside or anything like that. It's just that's how a lot of those shows that you would see like on TV and such for kids, like on PBS and such, would use, because it's like, you know, time, money, and whatever, you work with what you got.
Right.
But here, it looks charming. Everyone has a good design. I love Dunia's hair that looks like the stars at night. That's a very nice touch. And they are able to combine the seriously dark subject matter with whimsy that's handled better than most films that try to tackle this. I don't think it hits the area of like The Breadwinner or The Swallows of Kabul, but I think it does an admirable job.
If there's one word that I can describe this movie as, it's hopeful in a hopeless situation. I can only imagine the devastation that a lot of these Syrian families went through during this mass exodus, but I think this movie does a great job of like uplifting its audience by the time that the film gets to its ending.
It might be for younger audiences, and it definitely works on like a more fairy tale logic than how like realistically depressing this story would normally be, because it's such a tragic thing that's going on in our world. We were just complaining earlier, like, oh, well, I can't watch this animated film because I have no access to it. Well, these people here are having to uproot their lives because of stupid, petty wars, and then have to deal with stuff like discrimination and racism and being looked down upon, because it's like, oh, I'm sorry that I'm sitting down on the side of the road. I don't have a home. It does a good job with making sure that it doesn't try to sugarcoat the tone of the film too much into like being too saccharine. It helps that Dunya and like the grandparents and such and the other cast of characters that come with them are likable. Dunya is not the most obnoxious kid on earth or anything like that. She handles the situation as well as you would hope a kid could. She gets what's going on, but I'm sure it doesn't fully hit her until certain points in the story just kind of show how dire and depressing the situation is.
I agree with that. I think all of these characters are portrayed in a way that, like you said, makes them very likable, but you also just understand exactly what they're going through.
Like, I know some people will probably roll their eyes at the fact that all these situations are completed by these magic seeds that Dunya carries with her, and I know that's like not the exact point of what would actually happen, but let the film be magical and find a creative way to tell this kind of story. We live in this world where it seems like right now, at least in media literacy and such, where we can't be sincere or hopeful. It has to be like the world isn't like that, man. It's a dark, defeatist world. We can't have hopeful messages without turning our noses up at it. And it's like, be quiet.
People, and especially like adults, they don't know how to have an imagination anymore. And I think that's the one thing that, on top of the whole hopeful message of this movie, just the pure imagination on display here, I thought was just really well done.
It's all told through the perspective and mindset of our main character. So, of course, it's going to have a little bit more whimsy added to it. Granted, that stone thing that traverses with Dunya during the whole trip, I was a little shocked how little it played into the overarching story, because the stone thing comes in when either the mother or the father tells her the story about these two star-crossed lovers that were from two different sides of this country that they were in. And, you know, it's that Romeo and Juliet thing where it's like they were not allowed to be together. And then after the war was over, they found each other and were able to leave and find their own happiness. Then the statue thing comes to life, like of the two lovers from back in the story. I mean, what did you think about that part?
I wish we could have seen more of the immortal stone creatures. It seems like they were used very sparingly. I liked those characters quite a bit. I just wanted to see a bit more of them.
It's just a sweet movie. There's not too much else to talk about.
One last thing I want to bring up before we move on is I really like the music in this movie. I like how it's both sort of diegetic and non-diegetic. There are characters who are musicians who are embarking on this journey, but the music also kind of goes back and forth between what the characters are playing and just the general score. The way they mix those two together was really something special.
And overall, it was a solid movie. I wouldn't say it's my favorite film from the festival. I would say if I was ranking the films that I saw, this one would be second to last with Blue Thermal. But if it does somehow get like a US release, because the screener that we watched of the film with subtitles, which that didn't bother me. But there is a trailer with an English dub for the characters. So somewhere or somehow there will be some kind of English release for it. And if you do see it and you enjoy films like The Breadwinner or The Swallows of Kabul, I'd give it a watch. The children's storybook visual flair, the music, you will get a kick out of it.
What Cameron said, if this happens to be playing in a theater near you, definitely go see it.
I mean, we'll have to see, because I feel like this is one of those films that wouldn't get quite a theatrical release, or if it did, it would get like one of those one-day releases, like in New York and California, which, you know, a lot of distributors like to do that because they don't have to spend too much money. But we now get to talk about what was my third favorite film, animation or live action. Well, it's not just because of this, but it was the big Annecy Film Festival winner, and it was one of the big winners at the Animation is Film Festival, and that's where I got to see it and got to talk to one of the co-directors there. Little Nicholas, Happy as Can Be. And we had to be specific about that because there are like quite a few Little Nicholas adaptations, which I think are mostly live action. And it's directed by Amandine Fredon and Benjamin Masubre. It's written by Anne Goscinny, Michael Fessler, Benjamin Masubre, and Jean-Jacques Sempe. It's based off of the comic by Renee Goscinny and Jean-Jacques Sempe, which, you know, that's why their names are in the writing credits, because of how they adapt the Little Nicholas stories within the weaving narrative. The story follows the two creators meeting up one day for a relaxing lunch and figuring out what to do for their work together. They end up crafting a story about a little boy and his life with his family, classmates, and everything that you would think revolves around the life of a little boy. And that boy's name? Nicholas. The story then unravels into a mixture of both Nicholas's stories being told by the two and the two creators recollecting about their own childhood. Since this was the first time you got to see this film, were you worried that people like me were overhyping it, or like what were your thoughts about it?
Honestly, with you, I never have that problem because sometimes I've noticed throughout doing this podcast that you and I almost share a brain. We have our differences, but when it comes to certain animated films, I trust you more than I trust anyone else. That being said, I absolutely adored this movie. And I love how it has its cake and eats it too, as both a kind of sort of biopic of the creators of Little Nicholas, while also just telling some stories with the character. It's a really cool mix that I don't think I've seen too often.
Well, there are definitely a couple movies that have been released in these past decade at least, not the 2020s, but from the 2010s and such, where they try to focus on the life and time period of the person creating this iconic book or something. Because we've had like what was it? I forgot the name of it, but it was about the person who created Winnie the Pooh.
Goodbye, Christopher Robin.
It wasn't the Disney weird like live action thing with Ewan McGregor. It mixed the creative process of making Winnie the Pooh and then of course our creator dealing with the trauma of war. And then there was also Tolkien, which obviously it was about the guy who crafted Lord of the Rings while also dealing with wartime trauma. That seems to happen a lot with these movies. I don't know why this was a reoccurring thing. Either way, both of them were not all that memorable. Here, they found a way to balance out the creative story side of things. Like, I love the meetup at the beginning when they get to that little cafe and they have their wine, and the writer looks at the picture of little Nicholas and says like, oh, you should make something about this guy. And the illustrator looks over at a bus that says Nicholas, which I think was like an olive oil ad.
I think so.
And that's how he crafts it. And then they get back to his studio apartment. And there's that whole sequence when he's drawing little Nicholas and the writer's like, you know what every little boy needs? And they both say like something entirely different, with which was one of the funniest scenes from when I saw this at Animation Is Film. The illustrator going like a football, and the writer going a family. Right. Because you can't just have this little boy be the one reason this whole project they're working on, relies on. And as they are creating Little Nicholas and letting the stories become published and distributed and syndicated and what have you, the creative spark comes from how the Little Nicholas stories that are told coincide with the current mindset of the two creators. Because you get to learn a lot about their backstories. Like the writer mostly lived in South America for a lot of his childhood and thought France was the amazing locale. And how the illustrator did not have the greatest childhood growing up because of a flawed and broken family. But it never feels cynical or saccharine or manipulative with how it drops these little story beats of the actual people.
It all feels organic. Like these two creators are just kind of talking about their life, and it's kind of like they're injecting so much of their upbringing into this creation of theirs. He's like the son and these are his two parents.
Exactly, and how little Nicholas talks back to them and tries to understand through his childlike mind what they were going through, and how then they take that not perfect childhoods to create what is like an ideal childhood, like with the school and the different trips, getting a TV or seeing grandma and or what have you, or like the first time encountering a girl. And they find a way to make a lot of these sequences so charming because Goscinny was also the writer for a lot of French comics like Lucky Luke and
Asterix.
It's very charming. Sometimes you read a lot of those old French comics and there are some aspects that do not age well. Here, Little Nicholas works better for this kind of story because it's a more timeless tale. And I think that's very cool. There's a lot of charm. There's no gimmicks or anything like that where they try to modernize it for the current audiences and such. It's just whatever the humor was for back then. And it's very universal humor with how everything goes. The boys are having snacks and this girl neighbor comes over and they all try to impress her when one of them is only interested in like the doll, or like the girl is not really thinking like, oh wow, these boys are doing all this stuff to try to impress me. She's just kind of like, okay, you three, bye, without like a second thought. And the boys are like, what the hell was that?
That whole scene is probably one of the funniest moments of the film. They don't really realize until the end of that segment. It's like, oh, wow, we weren't even paying attention to her at all. We were just kind of doing our own thing.
I think my favorite story beats were like at the school, like when they did the school photo and that one kid would come in an astronaut or alien outfit. And he's just like, this is how I'm going to take the photo. And that's that. Like there was a real realism to how the kids interacted with one another. It felt like how Ghibli approaches young children.
Like the old Peanuts comics. This almost kind of feels like the French version of Peanuts to some extent.
Oh, I'm sure there are very similar aspects to both. The thing is, it never gets too mean-spirited with either side. Like, it gets mature for moments when the adults are talking about their lives. But for the kids, all of their stories have very childlike executions to tone and how the stories are told. Like when Nicholas and his best friend skip school to try to go see a movie. And then they realize, like, after a while, like, man, we're going to get caught and busted and then sent away. And they had that whole musical sequence where they're on a rowboat, like on a big old Viking ship. And then the camera zooms out and there's all these adult men in like the black and white prison outfits singing. And also like, we didn't do anything either. It's a consistently funny movie because of the wonderful watercolor 2D animation. They take advantage of a lot of like surreal creative ways to tell certain story beats. And it reminds me a little bit of how Only Yesterday did its flashback scenes, where in the current day of Only Yesterday, it's all typical traditional Ghibli beauty in the animation. But in the flashback sequences, they are watercolor and they're soft, but the backgrounds aren't fully complete, kind of like how fuzzy memories are when you try to remember everything.
That's actually a cool touch that each of these stories, they feel hand-drawn. I don't know if this movie specifically was like hand-drawn or is digital 2D animation, but just the fact that like there is that sort of fuzzy memory aspect to like the backgrounds and stuff is a cool touch.
The film story has a rhythm. It's pretty much the creators, Little Nicholas adapted story. The creators, Little Nicholas. The creators, Little Nicholas. It can feel very episodic, but the film flows very well between the two. It never feels like, oh, we're stopping this to move back to here and what have you, like how some films do that. It has a point, even a scene where they take a moment for little Nicholas to go to what is essentially a big jazz band performance. And because I am that kind of guy who wants to buy the tune if he hears a song from a film that he likes, the one that plays during the big band sequence is from Ray Ventura. Like I said, the animation is just gorgeous. If you love stuff like Ernest and Celestine, you will love this film's visual presentation and animation, with how it also pulls off its humor. It's a film that's bubbling and almost overflowing with charm and personality. Like, you just don't see that with a lot of pseudo biopic films, because they just want to tell a story. They want to be the Cliff Notes version of someone's entire history. Those don't turn out very well most of the time. I mean, with how many biopic dramas we get every year, it's amazing how soulless a lot of them can be, especially when they're about like a real specific person.
This one, like, it made the smart creative choice to really lean into the art style of the children's books and comics, and I appreciate that a lot.
And it does have like a very like somber ending per se. Like, you find out that something happened to one of the guys, and then after the whole summer camp story plot from Little Nicholas, which I thought that was the funniest section of the movie, you find out that the writer had a heart attack, and the illustrator is just, of course, destroyed by this news. And to pseudo current day, like, he misses him, but he knows that Little Nicholas will live on through generations, and that means that their friendship will as well. And it's such an optimistic tone to it, which is not always a given. Like, I think our next film is a lot more somber, but we will get to that in just a moment. But anyway, Little Nicholas, happy as can be, or I think it's also has other subtitles like Little Nicholas, are you going to wait for your happiness, or what have you. It was one of my favorite movies from last year, and it was one of the few films that sold out completely at Animation as Film. I was shocked they didn't try to shove in another screening of it like they've done sometimes, like with Weathering with You 2 festivals ago, where it's like, oh, whoops, there's just that big of a demand, so we'll just buy out another screening. Unfortunately, without knowing the plan for like that the distributor for the US has with this film, I think it's called like Buffalo 8 Productions or something like that. It's hard to know when everyone else will be able to watch this film, and that's frustrating, because when you have that like hot commodity movie that you see in a theater or something like that, where you're like, oh my gosh, I need everyone to see this movie, it sucks when there's no way for everyone to actually watch it.
I remember waiting very patiently to find any news about this movie's US distribution. I'm still technically waiting for any sort of update because, like you said, I want as many people to see this as possible.
It's one of those films, like our next one, that is an example of animation is cinema. Like, when you're actually being sincere about it. Because a lot of people seem to choose the same 3 or 4 films from America to prove this example. And I love those examples. I have nothing against them. It's just a movie like this is why I would say animation is cinema and why it needs more respect. And it doesn't matter if Brad Bird said that first or Guillermo del Toro has been using a sledgehammer to tell the entire industry this message. Animation is film. animation is cinema and it deserves respect. And this is one of those movies that shows why you should give it respect.
Agreed.
And that goes with our next film, a European collaboration of Tetina, which is also a pseudo biopic film. Like, I don't know how we got stuck with two of these. I just think that's a funny coincidence, even though I think this film is a little more similar to Buñuel in The Labyrinth of the Turtles, but we'll get to that point in a moment. This film is directed by Kaye Nais, and it's co-written by her and Per Schreiner. The story follows the perspective of a world-spanning adventure through the eyes of a little dog named Tetina. I think it's like a fox spaniel. This little dog, unfortunately, lives on the streets in Italy, but is then soon adopted by an aviator and airship designer named Umberto Nobile, voiced by Jean Gunnar Ruiz, which, fun fact, if you know that name, or if you feel like, I feel like I've seen that name before, that's because if you watched the 2011 The Thing film, like the one with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, that tried to be like a prequel to the John Carpenter version of The Thing, he plays one of the head characters of that film.
Oh, that's cool.
So basically, Umberto gets a call from the famed Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, who's voiced by Kaye Conradi, to craft a blimp to venture to the North Pole. And of course, this all takes place during the 1920s, during the early rise of Mussolini. And boy, how if I knew I was going to see two films in 2022 at the same animation festival that were going to have comedic caricatures punching down on Nazis and especially Mussolini with the same making them short like design, I'd have two whole nickels. It's not a lot, but the fact that it happened twice last year was something. Because, the other time it happened was with Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
Of course.
What did you overall think about the film?
This was fascinating. There's a lot of pre-World War II history that I'm not that all familiar with. So just from a historical perspective, it's kind of fun seeing European history from sort of a different perspective, because in history classes, you don't really get to learn that much about some of the smaller details. This story, I thought, was just totally engaging from start to finish.
Well, fun fact, this is the director's first feature film. And to come out swinging like that, it's like, wow, I can't wait to see what else you put out in the future. I compared this one earlier to Buñuel and The Labyrinth of the Turtles, which was another film that showed at Animationist Film back in 2018 and won one of the major awards there. And I say that because both films have that same story of what pride and personal drive can do to someone. Because this whole journey in history should have been like this amazing monumental task, but the explorer was mostly taking this opportunity to say like, hey, I was the first one here on the North Pole, so that means I'm amazing, and trying to shut out Umberto's contributions with the blimp and not hiding the fact that they were going to eat little Tetina at one point. This explorer is the worst.
The two telltale signs that someone is just absolutely despicable in movies is if they harm women, children, or dogs, or animals in general. That's when you know, oh, they're bad.
What's interesting about this movie is that on top of its also incredible 2D animation, I love the caricature style of all the characters. And the animation moves so fluidly. And it has this, I don't want to say flat because it sounds like it's a negative, but the underground comic style visual look, European comic look of the film is just gorgeous. And its approach to lighting, shading, and such to everything, it looks gorgeous. There's not a film out there that looks quite like this movie. And it reminds me of Buñuel because it used a very similar visual look. Well, not the caricature look, but just like the same kind of color palettes and how it designed its characters and its like landscapes. Like it feels cold while they're on the blimp and they're going to Alaska or on North Pole, or that first stop where they land in that big hangar area.
Oh, yep.
And they find creative ways to just show you how big the blimp is, especially, or how small you feel, especially when the film focuses on the perspective of everything through the eyes of Titina.
I do have to point out, there are so many great visual sequences in this movie, but I think there's one that has, to this day, remained in my head. It's the musical sequence that Titina has, the penguin.
Which one? There are two different sequences. There's the one before they take off in the blimp, and then there's that.
It's the second one.
Okay, yeah, the second one later on when Umberto does another blimp ride to the North Pole.
The second one, I compared that to the Pink Elephant Parade from Dumbo, and it's like they really went there with that wild hallucination sequence, and stuff like this is why I will continue to stand on my animation is cinema soapbox.
Another aspect of the story I like, just going back to the whole like pride thing, is while the explorer did it for a very selfish pride reason, and due to the arguments that he and Umberto have, Umberto slips into I say dark side, but like he uses nationalistic pride to get funding from Mussolini to make another blimp so they can do it for the pride of Italy. And unfortunately, because of Mother Nature being a unpredictable individual, the blimp crashes. It results in Titina's okay, but they all are stranded. And when the explorer hears about this, at first blows it off like, yeah, well, that's what happens. But you can tell that how human these characters are, because he knew a moment later he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he didn't go out there to save him. And that's what's so great about this movie. There's a moral grayness and a very realistic, somber ending for everything. Mm-hmm. Even though there are moments where like Titina befriends a whale and such, like those are all really great moments. But how they craft the story and the outcome from, of course, they have to follow history and such. And how the explorer is like, I'm going to go find him. He's my friend and I did not treat him well. And I wouldn't be able to live with myself if he died out there. And he almost found them. But Umberto was using his pride got in the way. And unfortunately, that led to the explorer's death. Not that he knew about it, and it only took more time to pass for it to happen. And by that point, when they get back to Italy, nobody cares about blimps because this is assumedly going into World War II at that point, and how Umberto did all of this, even for the sake of Italy. And yet he is treated with all his wares and such in a box and told him he has no job as an aviator anymore.
It's a very downer ending, but like you said, this movie travels from point A to point B, pretty much following history. Just because they're working in animation, they get to take some creative liberties.
It feels earned when it hits those moments, those sad moments, those upbeat moments, the happy moments. Too many times it feels like Hollywood, especially during award season, because tomorrow is the Oscars as we record this, Hollywood tries to tell everyone that these are the most important movies of all time, of the year. No other movies matter. It's whatever comes out in the September to December time period. As much as people like to complain about how soulless and corporate tentpole films can feel, a lot of award season films also feel soulless and they're just for the sake of award season. Rarely do we see a few of those movies feel like we're here to tell a story and to actually be a satisfying movie. This is one of those movies that makes me love movies. Titina is just a great movie. It's one of those adult animated feature films is going on about itself on its own path, at its own beat. It's a brilliant, globe-trotting wonder of animation. It's a human journey of what can happen when one's pride gets in the way of an experience that was meant to be a positive one for the world in which they live. Of course, we all see this through the eyes of one of the cutest animals in history, Titina, and how what can get us through turbulent times is not pride and such. It's love, compassion, and connection. Take a drink every time I say this episode. Unfortunately, there's no US distributor so far. And it's been like a few months now. Someone will pick up this movie. Come on, G Kids. You distributed our next movie. Pick up this one. It's great. It fits in with your film catalog. That's a problem when we trying to obtain and watch foreign animated films. There's no real way to do so until someone picks it up. It's like if I didn't have my current job and like all the money in the world, I'd probably found another G Kids like company and just be like, we're going to bring over all these foreign animated films so everyone can finally watch them.
I would totally do the same thing. With an unlimited budget, I would be my own G Kids, where it's like, I will track down movies from all across the globe and get them on as many screens as possible.
And there are companies that are doing stuff like finding old foreign animated features from like the 70s and 80s and giving them fresh new releases, which that's great, that's cool. There are only so few of them doing so, and G Kids is only one company, and they're going to focus on what's the one that's getting the most acclaim and whatever Ghibli is going to do. Because so far they've picked up that Miyazaki documentary series. They're going to distribute the stage play version of Spirited Away. And then they're also right now releasing Unicorn Wars on digital and in theaters. And of course, they've now recently picked up Ernest and Celestine. I hope they come around to pick up Titina because the director was really cool when I met her. The movie's great. It's not on my 2023 list yet, only because it doesn't have a distributor. I'm keeping it off until then because I don't feel like it's fair for it to stay on my list while every other film has a distributor.
It would probably be unfair to every other film released in 2023 if that is like their competition.
Well, it's with how slow the whole year's starting. Titina and our next film are like peak animation and such. Yeah, just go see Titina. I mean, if you can, once it's available, whether it gets a video on demand release or a physical release or a limited theatrical run, go see it when you can.
Our final film for tonight, and probably my personal favorite of the bunch, Ernest and Celestine, A Trip to Zaporizhia.
Yeah, this is the follow-up to Ernest and Celestine, the Oscar-nominated film from 2012, though it got released in 2013, so I consider it a 2013 film. But hey, it's fitting. 10 years from its US release, the sequel is going to get a release this year because of G Kids. The plot for this one is that Celestine accidentally breaks Ernest's violin, or what did they call it? Because this film has a lot of word puns.
I can't remember exactly what he called his violin, but it's like a special violin given by
like a music craftsman, an instrument maker. And it's very funny. It's like one of those dialogue jokes that I think is very funny. So Celestine accidentally breaks it, and Ernest is like, well, the only way we can fix this is if we take it back to Zaporizhzhia and get it fixed by then. But Ernest is very reluctant of going back to his hometown for reasons that are kind of hinted at in the first movie, but are now in the front seat of this one. So Celestine journeys out first, and then Ernest goes after her, and they finally reluctantly go to Zaporizhzhia and find out that something is up. It used to be a musically inclined city, but no music can be played unless it's one note. The C note, which leads to a lot of great visual gags. And you find out that Ernest is from here, and his family is there too, and has to deal with the situation at hand as to why music is outlawed in this city and such. By the way, the instrument in the movie is called Stradivarius.
There we go.
Which I'm sure is not the name of the actual instrument, but you get the idea. So, Mike, after years of telling you of the first Ernest and Celestine, and now finally being able to see both of them this time around, how do you feel about these two movies? Give me a quick thoughts on the first one.
The first one, it has taken me years to watch it, but I finally got around to it, and yeah, I can see why it's so beloved. I just immediately fell in love with these two characters, the story, the themes of nonconformity, breaking of traditions, and archaic social prejudices, all of that good stuff. Absolutely love the first film. And the sequel, I said this even in my Letterboxd review, that a trip to Zaporizhzhia is to the first film as Paddington 2 was to the original.
So you like this one more then?
Yes.
First, I'm having to kind of think about that still. I think I love them equally because they're both different movies. Because the first film is all about the strained dynamic between mice and bears. And it mostly focuses on the Celestine side of Ernest and Celestine, even though they still focus plenty of times with the two together. Here, we are dealing with animated film's recent favorite story trope of generational family drama. Like, boy, howdy, I'm ready for that storytelling tidbit to be done with for a while, because it does seem like it happened so fast within these past few years.
It has, yeah.
Like 2021 and 2022 had a lot of animated films that were all about that stuff. And the situation here says how the government has been censoring art and banning music, which you would think sounds like a silly follow-up story to have compared to the first film's story of like discrimination, racism, and what have you. But considering that we're dealing with parts of the US right now that are banning books, taking away access to art and media and literature, it's way more fitting than like ever before that's what this whole story is about. And how Ernest has to deal with the fact that his father was the one who put the law in place to where the current situation with music is right now. like within the story. He has to juggle between like his friendship with Celestine and with what he wants to do, like his love of music, Celestine, his family, and what's the right thing to do. And the story does a very good job of that. It carries over a lot of the same charm and appeal of characters from the first film to here. And if you're curious if any other characters from the last film show up, no. It's just Ernest and Celestine and then a new cast of characters, which I love Ernest's family. I love the mom and how no nonsense she is. And I love Ernest's little sister. I thought she was a very likable character. And we, of course, find out a little more about her as the movie goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And the dad at first seems like very one note, terrible, worst dad of the year contender. But you understand why he is, like the movie has, the catch line. It's just what it is. Like why things are as they are. And because, as we learned from the first film, Ernest was pressured into being a judge, just like his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and you get the idea. Even though there were times and memories where Ernest and his dad loved playing music, the fact that Ernest strictly did not want to become what his father was, the father took that, his pride was hurt. So he took out his anger and sadness by banning music and creativity and stuff like that. I like how they handled the story with this one. It gives enough time to flesh this new location out and the familial drama that's happening, because they show you a few things within this city, like how the kids dress up as their parents because, well, the kids are going to grow up to do what their parents do. Because, well, it is what it is.
This is like the most extreme example of kids taking over the family business. Of course, things in this movie are kind of taken to like a cartoonish extreme, but that's just part of the appeal of these stories. They just kind of excel in everything. Like thematically, both these movies are really rich in exploring heavy themes, but at the same time, they also have like a very jovial sense of humor. The visual gags are always great. I don't know why specifically, but anytime like there's a chase sequence and there's just like piles and piles of cops like on their tail, it just makes me laugh every time.
Both of these movies have great chase sequences with the police officers. It reminds me a lot of Lupin III.
Yes.
In some regards. And while this film does not have Benjamin Renner's more zany comedic animation, the animation is still wonderful and still just as creative and breathtaking. And they still find ways to make trippy little visual sequences, like when Celestine is getting chased by the police officers and it turns into like a sequence of musical notes chasing after one another. It was cool how they carried on with the spirit despite this having an entirely different team of directors. Like Benjamin Renner is not a part of this. It's directed by Jean-Christophe Roger and Julien Jaing, and written by Guillaume Baltalent and Sebastian Orcel. Like they do a good job of not retreading familiar ground with the sequel and still building upon the world, because like they don't care about like, oh, there's a mouse in this world now. Okay. Though it's funny how many times, one, Celestine gets the name of the city wrong, and two, how all these bears are like, look at that tiny bear. It's like, I'm not a bear, I'm a mouse. And how vaudeville Buster Keaton the physical comedy is. I love the first sequence when we meet that person with the bird mask and the saxophone. Probably the first great chase sequence of the year. And how the person in the bird mask jumps through a window and how all the police officers get in And then they all come out with like pots and pans and stuff because of all the different rooms they were going through. And then, of course, they miss the bird masked individual, and then they all just slide down these stairs. The physical comedy is great. I love that sequence where they get to the town square and there's a guy playing a piano, but it's only that one key, but the guy is like all in on that one key.
That sequence was great. I thought for a second that like, oh, he's just kind of warming up and he's going to like play this amazing chord progression. And then like you zoom in on the piano, it literally is just one note.
But it's also very touching about what happens when they reveal where those instruments are going, when they get confiscated, and how loving and joyful Ernest and his relationship with his dad can actually be when there's like no nonsense in a way. Like when Ernest tries to break out the person with the bird mask, who we all find out then is Ernest's little sister, and how he's wearing the judge outfit, and then one of the police officers is like, is that a trash can on his head? His dad shows up, and then he's like, Celestine's like, quickly, take away his monocle so he can't see you. It's very old school humor, very Looney Tunes-esque at points. And
yes,
I think that's just great. We need more films like that. And just like, it has such a sweet ending when you find out that the dad has actually been keeping all the instruments and taking care of them, categorizing them, repairing them. A fun little bit of foreshadowing during the production credits at the beginning. The operatic singing that happens is the same operatic singing you hear at the end of the movie when Ernest's dad starts singing.
Oh, wow.
I picked that up the second time I was watching it, and it was just such a sweet ending. I love everyone being like, I want to be a mechanic. I want to be a police officer. I want to be a baker. I want time off.
The dialogue in here it ranges from like broad, silly comedy to some very specific lines that are just sharp as a tack.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like with a lot of overseas animation, they use a lot of that same style humor and such. Like even something as dark and depressing as Buñuel and Titina have their moments where the humor is just spot on. And yeah, until otherwise, Ernest and Celestine, A Trip to Gibaricia, is going to be my favorite animated film of the year. I'm sure the Mario movie and Elemental are going to be great. They're probably going to be like right behind this one. But until maybe Miyazaki's film comes out, I think this will be the number one so far.
I know Benjamin Renner didn't direct this movie, but after watching the first Ernest and Celestine, I just became that much more excited for Migration, which is currently slated for December of 2023. I bet we're going to get a trailer in front of the Super Mario Brothers movie.
I feel like that has to be it, because so far there are 2 animated films that we don't of if we're actually getting them all this year, because we'll have Migration, and then there's Sony's and Genndy Tartakovsky's Fixed. Until then, I can't wait for everyone to see Ernest and Celestine 2. Just great movie. One of my favorites of the year so far. And it's entirely different from the first film, so it doesn't feel like it's rehashing anything.
It just kind of feels like another adventure.
Yeah, sure. Maybe you could argue Celestine takes more of a backseat this time, but it's Ernest's story. So it makes sense that he gets a bulk of the focus this time around, where Celestine is like a main character, but also very much supportive. Like sometime down the road, we will be able to see this movie, and hopefully in theaters. I'd love to see this on the big screen if G Kids is willing to put it enough in theaters. We only watched this screener that we got for this film in French, but they are going to have an English cast, and I do wonder if they will bring back Mackenzie Foy and Forrest Whitaker.
I was kind of wondering the same thing too, and because the screen that we got was just in French, I watched the first movie in French as well, so I haven't heard the English dub yet of the original, but I really do hope that whoever they get for the sequel does as good of a job as the original voice cast.
And we'll have to see, because there's also the CGI Ernest and Celestine TV series that Europe got that we did not get. We'll just have to see. But until then, next time we're going to be talking about My Father, the Bounty Hunter, and The Legend of Vox Machina Season 2. Play a little catch up.
One more thing I want to mention. I don't know when we'll have a chance to talk about it, but as of this recording, the first 5 episodes of the new Disney series KIFF are now on Disney Plus. So just throwing that one out there.
We'll talk about that one also next time.
But until then, Cameron, where can everyone find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and Hive at Cam's Eye View. I run my own website called camseyeview.biz, where I review animated films and shows from around the world, called The Other Side of Animation. I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/camseyeview. That's where you can find me.
And you guys can find me on Twitter and Hive at Captain K42. You can check out my quick thoughts on letterboxd.com/Coach K42. And you can follow Renegade Pop Culture on Facebook and Twitter at Ren Pop Culture. We're also on YouTube, on Podchaser. Follow our Patreon at patreon.com/Renegade Pop Culture. You can listen to all of our podcasts on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. And last but not least, everything can be found at renegadepopculture.com. Need an escape? So do we. That'll do it for this episode of Renegade Animation. We will catch you guys later. Peace out.